So this video is a kind of continuation from last week's video where I talked about how numbers can define our social identity. Although it is useful to have watched that beforehand, you don't have to, but if you do want to, then there's an annotation popping up here in the top right, which you can click. Otherwise, let's continue. Today's video is more about how to escape playing the popularity game, so to speak, and feel a kind of level of freedom from it. In a way, this video is for the version of me who was back in secondary when this stuff mattered most, but the truth is that this actually applies to all ages and whether or not this is in person or on social media. My journey involved letting numbers completely define me, feeling super inadequate, needing to chase popularity through social engineering, and never feeling satisfied in any part of the process. When we've convinced ourselves how important it is, it's so easy to chase it. I used to be extremely fearful staying where I was in terms of my social rank, because I had deemed it basically to be an inferior one, and I had created these idyllic, perfect worlds and associated them with the higher popularity, and felt as though I just couldn't stay in the one I was currently in. I had to move to the next levels. I felt as though I couldn't handle it because I was missing out on so much. It feels like we let the outside world define us because we're too scared to define ourselves. Surely the outside world is right because it's placed us in a certain hierarchy, and it's easy to kind of surrender to that and go, oh, well, that's what I am. Because I feel like if we tried to define it ourselves, maybe we'd think that we'd be knocked off the ladder entirely. It's like, in order to reach those higher levels, we have to play the game. We have to be in it, so to speak. And so we feel very compelled to play that game. Here's the thing, if I could talk to myself 10 years ago when I was in secondary, I would have a really tough time convincing him of anything because he was so emotionally involved in this fear and this chasing and this inadequacy that I wouldn't have likely listened to the logic, because survival instincts don't really account for logic. They don't work on that principle. Back then you couldn't have told me that there was any other way compared to how I was seeing things. All I was concerned about was simply not feeling inferior anymore, so I had to chase popularity. It was a real kind of stubbornness. So having gone through all of that and knowing what the solution is now, I could try and propose that solution to him, but he wouldn't probably be able to take it in. And so what's needed before a logical solution is usually an emotional one in this case. So I thought for a while, what would I say to him to account for what he was feeling in a way that would allow him to start opening up in this way, because obviously he was very closed off. He needed to do what he needed to do, and there's little you could have said to him to interfere with his perspectives. Here's what I came up with. Look, I get it. Right now, being popular and having everyone like you is the most important thing, and I imagine when you hear that you might already have had enough of what I'm saying, and have further reinforced your position on popularity. I want you to know it's okay to feel this way even if it doesn't feel like it. I know how scary it is in there, and it's making popularity look all the more important. Try consider that the freedom you're looking for isn't arriving because the way you're playing the game isn't leaving you feeling whole. In fact, I think you know that. If you define your own identity rather than letting your interpretation of the outside do it for you, you will experience the freedom you seek. We don't have to stop playing altogether. It's just like playing the same game at a distance. The one who stops trying to be a leader of the crowd can become a leader of their own life. Small steps in this direction with patience will help prove what I'm saying, and don't worry, you won't be left behind. Yeah, so that's part of the emotional solution. So that's catering towards what I was feeling. It's almost like I'm siding with his position to create some kind of space for a new type of thinking, so I don't have to be so dead set on one perspective. The thing I was scared of most was feeling more of that kind of inferiority and inadequacy. And I felt like if I wasn't so dead set on that, I was just going to feel more of that, and so I needed to try. But it was those exact feelings at the root of inferiority which kind of created the self-fulfilling prophecy and created, I suppose, a vicious cycle. In a sense, the whole system was made to keep itself in place. If, like me, you made popularity extremely important and you have to get there at any cost, then suggesting the idea of stopping playing that game altogether is the very opposite force, I suppose, of the way that you're going. And so you can't just push on a brick wall like that. You have to kind of come in alongside the brick wall, I suppose, and show it that it doesn't need to be pushing that much force in its direction, if that makes sense. Because as I said, we're trying to create new space for new perspective, because when you decide that you're going to see something a certain way and it's backed up by fear, it is really difficult to see it any other way for a while. So if I had reached a point where I'm not as emotionally triggered anymore and I'm not in my survival mechanisms, my rationale opens up again and I'm more open to hearing the rationale of the situation, because when you're in your emotions, of course, it's very irrational and you are driven by them. But when you get that space, you can start to think about the reality of the situation again, and you can be a bit more grounded. And part of that statement that I read to you before is about doing that. So here's the logical part of the solution. We're either trying to change the way that we play the popularity game, or we're trying to stop playing it altogether. Either way, we're going to engage in a kind of renunciation of the system. And in order to do this, we need to kind of have solid reasons as to why we can take popularity off its pedestal, which we've built, I suppose, over time in our minds. And for that, I've created some bullet points which may help do that. So even if you do get to a high level of popularity, you will adapt emotionally. So even if it does feel amazing for a while, it will wear off very quickly after that. This means that it's just going to feel normal again. You're not going to be living on some higher plane of existence where you're so much happier, which is what we kind of assume it might be like prior to having experienced it. You may embody a kind of superior ego where you're now putting everyone down and constantly reinforcing their position under you. The competition doesn't stop when you get there. In fact, it's probably stronger than ever, as everyone feels closer to the top and perhaps wants more. They've had a taste of the elixir and they need to drink more and more and more of it. So even if you do rank up, you'll be looking basically still upwards because you didn't address the root cause, which will run forever. And that root cause is the fear of inadequacy. It is the fear of staying in inferior positions and missing out on something. So if you don't work at those root levels, then it will continue. You might always be in a state of fear as you try and hold on to your position and exhibit a kind of anxious attachment style, which basically means you're secretly scared that others are going to abandon you, even if it's wrapped up in a shiny facade. Authentic relationships can become harder because everyone's trying to uphold a kind of image or standard, and those below that standard are more interested in status rather than a genuine connection. And so people who perceive themselves to be beneath you try and use you. If we're talking social media, it can be very addictive to get lots of likes and feeling validation, and you can get trapped in this superficial reward cycle which doesn't really amount to much in real life. Popularity really translates in value to adult life, and if it does, it's often a huge obstacle to overcome because it stands as a barrier to true fulfillment before it's fully understood. So those ideas allow us to take popularity off the pedestal and kind of destroy this idyllic version of it that we've created. Because if we know the reality of it, we're way less likely to be so intense about chasing it. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what other people think about you, but only what you think about yourself, because the way that we think about ourselves create the social cues for other people to follow and to treat us. So we're actually the root of this, not other people, and we get that the wrong way round. So you'll notice that what we're doing is we're bringing all of the power back to ourselves, instead of surrendering it to the outside world and saying, oh, I'm just a part of the game and the system decides where I place and I'm going to act out that place in the system or the social leaderboard, right? Instead of acting out that, we're taking our power back and deciding how we're wanting to act because we're defining ourselves again. And it feels risky if we do this because we feel like we might completely fall off the ladder if we do this, or things might get worse. But really it's the opposite, because we're returning a sense of security within ourselves, and if we feel secure within ourselves, then that's going to radiate outwards, and paradoxically that's when you're more likely to get along with everyone better instead of creating all of this unnecessary tension. What we're really trying to do here is achieve a shift in identity, because a kind of identity formed when we acted out the person who has X amount of likes, or is in this specific social group. And we're looking to no longer reinforce these identities in ourselves, because you created that identity of who it is to be in that certain social group and now adhere to it and carry out, I suppose, the actions of that person, and you've embodied that identity because you feel as though you have to. It can be difficult to feel as though you can escape that, but you can. So identities that we create stay strong when they're reinforced, but if we stop reinforcing them in the same way by understanding what's happened and breaking away from it when we find ourselves reasserting that position, we can start to reinvent ourselves in this way. Thinking differently like this feels uncomfortable and perhaps even wrong, because it's challenging the structures that were built to maintain the previous identity. But if you keep practicing this new reinforcement of identity that you're not this or that person, then it will start to break away. In terms of social media, I took a very cold turkey approach, so I basically stopped using it almost altogether for, I think it's about 1.5 years now. What this meant was I wasn't firing those same identity reinforcing circuits each time I was using it anymore, because I simply wasn't using it. And so I started to get some distance from it, and I wasn't holding it so close to me anymore. You need to rigidly separate the outside world from the inside world in order to start creating that distance, because it's that exact link which might be keeping you stuck in that identity. So I'm not saying that we need to completely abstain from social media, but the changes that happened as a result of doing that are what we're looking to replicate, and I don't think that you need to completely quit to do that. But it's just the point of how completely reinforcing these things keeps it alive. To be honest, the teenagers of today would likely scoff at the idea of completely abstaining from it. So if that's the case, we have to be more aware of what's going on in our heads, like what identity is being reinforced for yourself. A big part of not defining yourself by a number is learning not to define others by numbers too, so it actually works both ways. This can also be translated to not putting other people in certain ranks in your head when you see them in real life anymore. So this isn't just an online thing. When we stop reducing other people down to a number or a rank, it makes it a lot easier for us to do the same for ourselves. What we're actually doing is rehumanizing people. That's not even a word, I don't think. But what we did before is like a dehumanization. We're reducing them down to something far less than what they are. And we're trying to put everyone on one level playing field instead of having everyone at these different peaks and troughs. A number doesn't represent an entire human being, it's not even close. But if you're defining other people by a number or a rank, that's all they appear to be. And I think we're really good at hypnotizing ourselves in this way. So I hope this has been helpful, even if it's just prompting you to think in new ways. The whole idea is to not be hypnotized by this whole thing anymore and kind of return back to reality. And hey, easier said than done, but you have the knowledge now, and I'm wishing you all the best. Thank you, and I appreciate your time.